All right, we're going to be learning about a new concept today called inverses of a function. And so an inverse of a function is the relation formed when the independent variable is exchanged with the dependent variable. If the inverse of a function is itself a function, then it is called an inverse function. So we're starting with this line as our original function. And so if you notice, here's your x-axis, here's your y-axis. There's specific points we could look at along this line. And so if I'm looking at this table that we've already done over here, we've already identified some of these points for you on this line. So let's talk about some of the qualities here of an inverse. We're going to see that it is a reflection of this line across y or over the line y equals x every time. Every inverse is a reflection across this line. And it's when we take the original x and y pairs and we completely switch them out and make it the y's become the x's and the x's become the y's. This means that the domain becomes the range and vice versa. The range becomes the domain. All right, so let's go see what I mean about the reflection over the line y equals x. So starting here at the origin, up 1 over 1. This is the parent graph of y equals x. How do I know that? Because it starts at the origin and has a slope of 1. So grabbing your rulers, connecting that reflection line, we're going to make it a dashed line. And that is the y equals x. This is the line that we're going to be reflecting the other line over. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how this table does represent this current line. So for example, -1, 1, this is a dot on that line right here. 1, 2 is a dot on the line right here. -3, 0 is a dot on the line here, etc., etc. So these are the original dots of the original line. If you wanted to write the equation for the line, you could, but it's not necessary. We're going to be going ahead and flipping the table right here, and actually we wrote out the equation of the line for you right here in point slope form. But so anyway, let's go do the rule of completely flipping the x's and the y's. So taking all of these x values, they now become the y values. I just took the x's and those became the y, or the outputs. Then I'm going to take all the outputs from before and make them the inputs. So just to be clear, the x values become the y values. The inputs become the outputs. And the outputs become the inputs. The domain becomes the range becomes the domains. Outputs become inputs, and inputs become outputs. They totally switch. So let's go and make the new line based on the switched variables. So 1, -1 becomes this new dot. 2, 1 becomes this dot. 0, -3, -2, -7, and 4, 5. Okay, then I'm going to grab my ruler and connect the new inverse line. This new inverse is called f of -1 of x. That's the name of our inverse function. And the original function was called f of x. Okay, so the first part is that we're taking a table and we're flipping the table so that we can graph it. Notice we have this new reflected line. If I took this line and I reflected it over that y = x line, this is the line we would get. We used the table method. We're now going to go use the x and y switch method. This is the algebraic method. Okay, so what we're doing is anywhere that there was a y, we're going to switch it to an x. Anywhere that there was an x, we're going to switch it to a y. So I'm going to make this the x, and I'm going to make this the y. Now we're going to solve for this y. We're going to move everything around to make this still be a y = equation at the end, and that's going to give us the equation of our inverse. So step 1, we add 1 to both sides because we're trying to isolate this y. So add 1 to both sides. Step 2, we're going to get rid of this fraction by multiplying both sides by 2. Step 2 was multiply by 2. So 2 quantity x plus 1 equals y plus 5. Last step, we subtract 5 from both sides. And this is our equation. But I am going to switch it around just so that it's in a y = format. Are you okay if I just flip this around? And this is my function inverse. So I'm going to give it its true name, f of -1 of x. Now the reason there were 3 steps here is because there was 3 different functions happening within this function, meaning there was a 5 being added, there was a half being multiplied, and there was a 1 being subtracted. So to undo each of those pieces, we went backwards and we added 1, opposite of 1, of -1. We multiplied by 2, opposite of multiplying by a half. We subtracted 5, opposite of adding 5. All these are called the inverse function, the opposite, because we're undoing all the pieces that we did, and then we just switched it around to a y =, and we gave it its inverse function name. This is the algebraic method of switching the x and the y. Now, there's kind of a shortcut to this method that the Math 3 teachers prefer. And this is a real quick table. So I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite the function. Oh, let's call it f of x. F of x is equal to 1/2 x plus 5 minus 1. So what they have you do, they have you look at the original f of x function and then create the inverse function by doing the steps in reverse. So for example, we ask ourselves, what is happening to this x first? The first thing happening is we're adding 5. The second thing happening to this x after we add 5 is that we're multiplying by 1/2. The third thing that's happening to this function is that we're subtracting 1. We're going to go down in that order, what happens to the x first, second, and third, and then we're going to go back in reverse. What's the opposite of minusing 1? We want to add 1. What's the opposite of multiplying by 1/2? We multiply by 2. What's the opposite of adding 5? We subtract 5. These steps are what we're going to do to our new x in the inverse. So we write f of -1 of x. is equal to, so we take our x, we first add that 1 to it, we then multiply by 2, and then we subtract 5. And there's our inverse function. Hey, look, it matches the one we got algebraically. Do you like this little shortcut conceptual way of it was added 5, multiply by a half, subtract 1. The inverse operation or opposite would be add 1, multiply by 2, minus 5. And then we just take the x and add 1, multiply by 2, and minus the 5. Did you like this shortcut way better, or did you like the full algebraic way better? Either one can be used to show your work on your homework tonight.